We're discussing the different types of nisim, and we're going to start explaining today. We said last time that there's nisim that are higher than teva, they're above nature, and there's nisim that are mulubashim in teva, that the nes comes together with nature. And the Maamar said, in Chassidus we say the opposite of what one would assume, that a nes that's melubish in teva has a higher sheirish than a nes that's higher than teva. And a nes that's more melubish in teva, that the garments of teva aren't recognizable as a garment to the nes. A nes that the nes is completely hidden by nature has an even higher sheirish. And now we're going to explain why it's like that. It would seem that the more the nes is supernatural, it's a bigger nes. It says, Ois Gimel, v'yuvan ze behaktim, we'll understand this by prefacing, Dezeh sheirish hanisim hamulubashim beteva hu mimokim nailo yeser misheirish hanisim shalamayla me'ateva. Why is it? Why do we say that a nes that's in nature, that a nes that works together with nature, has a higher sheirish than a nes that's completely above nature? And we're going to give now two reasons why we say this. First reason is Ki behanisim shalamayla me'ateva, by nisim that are higher than nature, what is every nes? The Eibishter created the world. It says Bereishis bara Elokim. Elokim has the same gematria as teva. The world was created with the force of nature, with the tzimtzum of Shem Elokim that creates nature. And then from time to time, when the Eibishter performs a nes, what's happening is there's coming down into the world the gilui of l'mayla me'ateva. Tava is, so to speak, the force of godliness that comes down in a finite form. It's the koyach hagvul. It's a limited force, and therefore everything in the world has limitations.
In a sense, isn't that miracle itself? That God's able to contain and be finite?
Correct. And that's why many times we say that it's not so much in this, that Teva has an even higher sheirish than a nes, but each one has its... But a nes is the gili, it's the revelation of the infinite force of Ein Sof, the infinite force of godliness, and that's why that manifests itself as something that's miraculous. Now, knowing this background, now we're going to discuss what's the difference between the two types of nisa. If the nes is l'mayla me'ateva, so what's happening is hagilui de Ein Sof habligvol shalamayla me'elameis. This revelation that this is the essence of every nes. It's the revelation, the manifestation of Ein Sof habligvol, of the infinite expression of Ein Sof that's completely higher than the world. Because the world is Bereishis bara Elokim. The world is that level of godliness, so to speak, that relates with nature. When there's a nes, there's a gili Ein Sof habligvol, shemimenu nimshachim hanisim, that's the root, that's the source of every nes. And when the nes remains higher than teva, that means that this gili Ein Sof habligvol, this revelation, this expression of the infinite force of godliness, who be'efen, it comes down in such a manner shehat teva batal idea gili. It pushes aside nature. Nature gets broken. Nature is pushed aside. It's called shidud maraches hateva. The rules, the structure of teva is shattered. That's when it's a nes shalamayla me'ateva. Ubemela, it follows, by extension, what we're saying is that ein nimshach hagili ba'elam. The world is nature. When the nes breaks the laws of nature, that means that the nes didn't come into the world. The nes, so to speak, pushed aside worldliness, it pushed aside nature, it pushed aside the world, and it replaced world with nes. It replaced the gvul, the limitation of the world, with the bli gvul of the nes. In contrast to that, when the nes is enclosed in nature itself, by the nisim that are melubish in teva, it's still a nes. What's taking place is still a manifestation of the infinite Ein Sof, of the Ein Sof habligvul, of that level of godliness that's higher than the world. And yet the nes is in such a way that the world continues to function. Nature continues to be nature. So the Gili Erin Seifa Bligvol Hu Biha Elam Atzmei, it expresses itself, it's revealed in and within the world. And this seems to be a combination of two opposites. The world is limitation. The world is the finite, so to speak, aspect of godliness. The Nes is Eirin Seifa Bligvul, the infinite force of godliness. So by their very nature, they're contradictory. They can't go together. Therefore, he says, V'chivan she'ha'olam atzmei gvul. The very nature, the very definition of world is limitation. It's the chayus alaki, that's alikim, that's tzimtzum. The world is gvul. The nest that's being mislabish in the world is bligvul. Gvul bligvul hem shnei afachim. Limitation and infinite, finite and infinite are opposites, are contradictory. What does that mean? That the nest is mislabish in the world. These are two forces that can't coexist. How could it be that there's a nest that's melubish b'teva? It says, in order for this to happen, lachein b'chtei shehagili de'erein seif habligvul. In order that this should take place, to have the gili of the infinite Erin Seif, bihagvul da'elam, and it should be in and within the world itself, the only way that that can come to be, huayidei sham shachas habligvul, is through the fact that by these miracles, by the Nes HaMelubish B'Teva, where is the Nes coming from? Where is this Eira Bligvul originating from, so to speak? Is Me'atzmos Eirin Seif, from Hashem himself, from the essence of godliness, from the essence of Hashem, Shenimsa B'chol Mokim, Gam B'Hagvul V'Teva Deilam. The essence of Hashem is equally connected with the limitation of the world as with the infinite force of the Nes. So what we're saying now is like this. When there's a Nes that shatters nature, when there's a Nes that's L'mayla Me'ateva, what that is, that's Eirin Seif HaBligvul. That's a specific level, a specific definable expression of godliness. It's the way Hashem manifests himself in an infinite way. And therefore that level of godliness doesn't coexist with the world, which is limitation, and therefore the laws of nature become shattered. They become pushed aside. A Nes that's melubish in teva means it's something higher. It's not a specific manifestation of godliness which is, so to speak, forced to be infinite. It's Hashem himself, and Hashem is not limited by being infinite. He can be infinite and he can be finite. When it's a Nes that's melubish in teva, that's atzmos, that's the essence of Hashem himself, that's here in the world just like he's above the world, and therefore in that Nes, the Nes could coexist with the world. It can be present in and within the world. So this is one explanation for the Maila, for the reason why we say a Nes that's melubish and teva has a higher sheirish. Why is it higher? Because here we see the combination, the coming together of two opposites. This Nes has a root. It's rooted in the essence of Hashem that's able to be present in and within the world. Va'id bir now a second explanation. Where do we see why there's an advantage in nisim that are melubish in teva over nisim that are higher in teva? It says the inyan hanisim. What's the idea of a nes? What's the purpose and goal of a nes? Shal yada mizgala shehu yisparach meishel v'shelet ala teva. When I look at nature, the natural impression that it makes on me is that the world is running itself, that the nature, that the laws of nature are controlling the world. When I see occasionally a Nes, so the Nes shows the balabatishkeit, it shows the control, the way the Eibishter controls the world, Hashem controls the world. The Nes shows that the Eibishter is ruling nature. Ve'inyan zeh, this idea, this message that we're getting from the miracle is clearer, is stronger in a certain sense by a Nes that's melubish in teva. Mizgala yeser, it's more telling, it's revealed more by nisim hamelubashim b'teva when the Nes is enclosed in the laws of nature. The gili memshalta yisparach hayidei hanisim shalamayla me'ateva. The way we see the rulership, the control of Hashem when the Nes is higher than nature, when the Nes breaks nature, what we're seeing there is Shebekeicha Yisparach Levatel Uleshadid es Chukei HaTeva. We're seeing only that Hashem could destroy nature. He can overpower nature. But that's not the ultimate control. That's not the ultimate rulership. Ubanisim shemelubashim beteva, when the Nes is melubish in nature, when the nature wasn't shattered, and nonetheless there's a miracle, Mizgala, what we're seeing then is she'orein seif meishal v'sheilet ala teva atzmei. We see Hashem's rulership, His control over the nature itself. Sha'teva yir kefir etzeinei, the nature should continue to exist and nevertheless conform with what Hashem wants. If you would imagine, for example, there's a counselor in a camp who has two counselors who have campers, or a parent who has two children, or a teacher that has two students. So there could be one counselor that has a camper who's a troublemaker. And he's a troublemaker. So he finally takes him and he kicks him out of the bunk or kicks him out of the camp, and the boy stops making trouble, right? So you see his control, the counselor is in control, he's able to send this kid away. But then there's another counselor who doesn't kick him out. The kid stays in class, and he's able to make him behave. Which one do you see more his control over the camper or the child or the student? The second one, you see a much bigger control. The first one wasn't able to control him. He had to get rid of him. Yeah, you see his power over him because he's able to kick him out. You see his power that he's able to push him away. But that's not the ultimate power. The power of control is when he can be here and I can govern the way he acts. I can control the way he acts. When there's a Nes Shalamayla Me'atava, you see in one sense the power of the Eibishter. And later in the Maamar, we'll come back to the contrast between the two ideas. But in the one sense, I see the power of the Eibishter, that he's stronger than nature. And therefore, he could eliminate nature. He can push it aside. He can get rid of it. But that's not the ultimate control. Where do I see the control of Hashem? That He doesn't eliminate nature. He lets nature continue to exist, and yet nature has to conform with what Hashem wants. So by Nes that's Maslabish and Teva, you see the control of Hashem in a deeper sense.
But the other one also, he weaves it in to make to let it has some kind of shaykhis to Teva.
Which? The Nes that's L'mayla Me'ateva?
Yeah.
Well, it's pushing away Teva, but it's not in this Maamar. There's another Maamar, that's a summer Maamar, Zehayim, where the Rebbe there explains, the Rebbe there explains that even a Nes Shalamayla Me'ateva does have some relationship with Teva. The world is still there, but it's a much more distant relationship, so it doesn't affect what we explained over here. Now, let's just take this a little bit further in Ha'ara 25. We said that in the Nes that's Melubish and Teva, there's also two types. There's a Nes that's Melubish and Teva, where everyone knows that there was a Nes, even though there was nothing supernatural. He gave the example earlier in the Maamar, like Chanukah and Purim. The laws of nature weren't actually bent, but yet everyone knew there's a Nes happening here that's working together with Teva. And then there's a Nes that the Nes is completely hidden. He said, Ein bala Nes makir b'nisei, sometimes the recipient of the Nes doesn't know that he experienced a Nes. So when there's a Nes that's recognizable, like Chanukah and Purim, then we can understand what he said over here in the Maamar. If the Nes is recognizable, so what you're seeing is that the Eibishter is performing a miracle, and you're seeing that that miracle didn't have to break Teva. So you see the control of the Eibishter, that he can let Teva exist, and yet nature conforms with what Hashem wants, and therefore there was the miracle of Chanukah, or the miracle of Purim, or any other similar miracle. But if the Nes is completely hidden, so where is its advantage over a Nes that's L'mayla Me'ateva? That's what this Ha'ara is going to explain. This Ha'ara 25, Valderech said the same idea, that we're seeing in a deeper sense, we're seeing a greater element of control, where the Nes doesn't shatter Teva. This is even more so b'negei lahayisrin, with regards to the advantage, the hanisim she'ein bala Nes makir b'hem, those nisim that are completely hidden, that ein balanes makir benise, that the recipient of the miracle is unaware that he had a nes. There shehem nimshachim mimakim elyon yeser gam mi nisim hamulubashim beteva shenikar banes bam. They are from an even higher root than the nisim that are in teva, but they're recognizable. Because of this reason also, he says, ki kasher nikar bilvushei hateva shehem rak levush. When it's recognizable, when you look at nature and you can tell that there's a miracle happening even though nature wasn't bent, hu lefi shashini shenase bekeches hateva hu begilik sas v'lachein hu dugmas shidud hateva. Says, why by Purim was it recognizable to everyone that there was a nes, even though the laws of nature weren't broken? Because even though they weren't broken completely, they were bent a little bit. Everyone could see 1 second. Still, according to nature, it doesn't make sense that everything should fit into place so perfectly, the whole chain of events. So nature was a little bit shaken up. It wasn't broken. There wasn't anything miraculous, but nature was changed somewhat. It was bent. It was pushed into place. And therefore, you're still seeing some element that the nature has to be bent to force it to comply. In those nisim where you bechlal don't see that the nature is just a garment for the nes, where the nes is completely unrecognizable, even though there's a change of nature even by those miracles, there the change is completely hidden. By these nisim the nature is with its full strength. And still Hashem is controlling it. You see an even greater element of control. Let's take the same mashal that I gave you before. So you have the counselor who kicks the kid out of the bunk. So his control is only that he's stronger, he could break the kid. You don't see him being able to control the kid. That's not the real educator. Then you have two counselors who the kid stays in the bunk and they're able to control the kid. That's like the Eibishter says Teva stays and he's able to be in control. But there's two types. So one counselor, he's able to have the boy staying in his bunk, but everyone knows that something unusual is happening. This boy is a troublemaker, and they see he's not behaving like his normal self. Maybe the counselor is giving him a lot of sweets, a lot of promises. If everyone can tell something is going on, so that's still not the ultimate educator. He's not really changing the boy himself. He's not controlling the boy himself. He's using an outside force that everyone could tell that the boy is not really being himself. If there's no one can tell that something unusual is happening when it seems like that's his regular behavior, that's the educator who actually got into the boy and he made him act like that because that's him. It says when the nes is not recognizable at all, when you look and you think it's only nature, but really there's a nes that happened, that means there we're seeing the Eibishter is completely in control, that the teva doesn't even have to be bent in the slightest, and yet the teva as it is remaining in full force is not guided and controlled by the laws of nature, it's guided and controlled by the Eibishter. So we had two explanations in why we say that the sheirish of a nes that's higher than nature comes that's melubish in teva, that's in nature, is from a higher source, a higher root than a nes that's l'mayla me'ateva. The first reason is because a nes that's melubish in teva has to come from the Eibishter himself, from atzmos, from the essence of the Eibishter, that's able to be in nature, that's able to bring together bli gvul and gvul. And the second explanation is that dafka when a nes doesn't shatter nature, we see in a deeper sense, in a deeper way, the balabatishkeit, the control of the Eibishter, his jurisdiction over nature, that he doesn't have to break nature and still he controls nature. Now we're going to go further and explain the difference between these two explanations. There's two different explanations. Why do we need both of them? To understand what the difference is, what the advantage of one explanation over the other, what the difference between the two ways of understanding how there's an advantage in a nest that's in nature over a nest that's above nature. So to understand that, says the Rabbi, Yuvan Bahaktim, first we have to preface understanding nature. First we need to digress and discuss nature itself, and then we'll see the difference between these two explanations. That it says in the Akiva, Shegame anhagas hateva efshar leida gadlus haberi. We said before the purpose and the goal of a nest is that when we see a nest, we realize that Hashem is running the world. Nature could fool you into thinking that the world is running itself. A nest shows us, no, the Eibishter is running the world. The Akeda, which is one of the Rishonim, says really, even nature itself shows us the greatness of the Eibishter. And in a few ways. The Neisaf lazeh shaydei his beinenus behanhagas abriya, hilacha mazalis chulu, baim la'akara sheyesh balabayis lebirazum. Besides the fact that when a person really pays attention, when a person contemplates, thinks into the laws of nature, he realizes that there has to be a Eibishter running the world. So you see from nature, you see the existence of the Eibishter. This couldn't have happened by itself. That's one thing. But in that sense, what I'm seeing from nature is the level of Elikos that's comparable to, that comes down into the world. I see the level of the Eibishter, the way he creates the world, Bereshis Bar Elikim, from the existence of the world. But he says further than that. If you think into the fact, by focusing not on the mere existence of nature, but on certain aspects of nature. Nature, which by definition is limitation, it's part of the world. Nature, which by definition is gvul, has in it an element of bli gvul, that the laws of nature, since they were started, never changed. It's Tmidis, it's constant, Belishini, unchanging, Ubeloshin Akasav Lo Yishbesu, like the Pasuk says in Bereshis, Kayis V'cher V'cheim Lo Yishbesu, it never stops, it never rests. There's never any change in Teva, which is the opposite of Teva. Teva by definition is limitation. Then the lack of change in Teva is an element of infinite, of bli gvul. Even though it's nearing 6,000 years since the world was created, that's more than enough time for things to have been changed. The laws of nature didn't weaken. The sun going up in the morning in the east and coming down in the west, and gravity making things fall, is just as strong as it was when it originally started. This force of nature, if it works according to the rules of the world, Chassidus brings a lot of times the Rabbeinu B'chai, Hatinik Mishaneilad Mascholis Yabish. From the moment a baby is born, he starts drying out, he starts weakening. Everything in the world is constantly weakening. The force of nature, according to the laws of nature, according to the laws of the world, should be weakening. So there's gravity after 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, it should fall down slower. The sun should move slower. Everything, all the laws of nature shouldn't be with the same strength, with the same power as originally. Everything is weakening. And yet we see, when you look at the laws of nature, it's close to 6,000 years. It's with the same extent, the same force as when it started out. V'chein mizah, and more than that also, when we look at another natural phenomena, that shebemeshach kol hazman, and all of this time of close to 6,000 years, the actual created beings did not become weaker. See, this brings a Yerushalmi. The heavenly planets, the heavenly bodies, the tzva hashamayim, the sun, the moon, the planets, they themselves didn't become weak. It's not just a force. This earth is the same earth that it was almost 6,000 years ago. The sun is the same sun. All the heavenly bodies are chazakim kiyem hibaram. They're not containing this nature of maschalis yabish, of being constantly weakening. They retain exactly the strength and the form the way they were created. And even tzva ha'aretz, the earthly bodies, which is all of the different species in the earth, that nothing lasts forever in the earth, but they're kayamim b'min. Every species remains. It's not like horses, and close to 6,000 years, they're not slowly getting smaller. Everything is, sure, each individual one dies out, but then there's another one. According to the rules of nature, since this one comes from the one before, and from the one before, the ongoing force should be gradually diminishing, and that's not happening. So in all these different ways, both in the hilach hamazals, in the actual way that nature acts in the world, and in the specific bodies, and the specific created matters, we see a certain element of infinite in nature, even though the very essence of nature is finite, is the Kayach HaGvul. Says the Akiva, from all of this we see Al Yideza Yedim Gadlus Abeire, we see the greatness of the Eibishter, that even though he created a finite world, but the force of Alikus in the world is an infinite force. Shekaycha Yisbarach, that the force of the Eibishter, Shemimenu Ba Hashpa Ba'elam, from which originates this hashpa, all of these created beings in the world, who ain't safe or bligvul, is a force that's infinite, and therefore we see the element of infinite, of bligvul, in so many areas within nature, within the limitation, the gvul of the world. What time is it? We have to stop? What? A few minutes, okay. So therefore, in Teva, says the Akiva, when you look at nature, you see the bligvul of the Eibishter just like you see it from a nas. Dagam sheteva hanivram hu me'achayis alaki shemislabish bahem. Even though nature in general and the individual nature of every single being comes from the chayis alaki, there's a godly force in every being that's the source of its nature. Every single created being has a different nature, both inanimate objects. Water has a nature of being wet, stones have a nature of being hard, and then higher beings for sure. Different animals have different natures. Why does everything have a different teva, a different nature? Because everything has a different chayis alaki. To say that it has a different chayis alaki means the Eibishter doesn't have differences. Hashem is infinite, is bli gvul. But the specific chayas that goes, that force that goes into every individual being, is mitzumsum, it's concealed, it's hidden, it's a mugbodik, it's a finite, so to speak, godly force. And because it's finite, therefore it's able to come in a different form in every being. So every being has its own individual nature. So how do they have, if it's a finite force, it's gvul, so how do you see in nature and beings, both in their individual beings, in the tzva shamayim, in the min, in the species, how do you see an element of infinite if the chayas alaki from where they exist from is finite? That's all when you're talking about nature. Nature is kayach hagvul. Nature is gvul. Everything natural means that it's limited in a certain sense. But that we see in everything natural, one element of infinite, that there was never a change in nature, that the species is ongoing, has continuity, that the tzva shamayim, the heavenly bodies have continuity, that tmidius, that one element of infinite that we're able to see even in nature, she'ein ba shinu v'chalishas, those aspects of nature that go, so to speak, against nature, those aspects of nature where we see a lack of weakening and a lack of change, who bekayach ha'ein seif ha'bligvul shalamayla mishtalshlos, is because this so to speak, finite godly force, this force that's mugbal, that's in a limited form, and therefore it's different in every being, contains within it the kayach ha'ein seif habligvul, the infinite force of Hashem, that gives therefore a certain infinite nature in these natural mugbal dike beings. Okay.